The delivery box hit the marble floor and split open foam packing peanuts, spilling across a billionaire's foyer because Caleb Johnson had just looked up and seen his dead wife's face staring down at him from a 12-foot portrait on the wall. "That's my wife," he said, his voice cracking down the middle. "That is my wife." But the golden plate beneath the painting carried a different name, Isabella Ashford, beloved daughter. And the richest woman in the city went pale as bone the instant she saw Caleb's face. What she was about to confess would rip open a grave 3 years cold. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels, and if a good story still means something to you, subscribe and stay with me to the very end. Caleb Johnson had learned a long time ago that a man could get used to almost anything if he had a reason to get up in the morning. His reason was 6 years old, had a gap where her front tooth used to be, and called him Daddy, like it was the most important word in the English language. That morning, the reason was standing on a kitchen chair in a 2-room apartment on the east side of the city, watching him pour cereal. "Daddy, you're doing it wrong," Maya said. "I'm pouring milk, baby. There's a right way and a wrong way to pour milk. You gotta pour the cereal first, then the milk. If you pour the milk first, the cereal floats, and floating cereal is bad luck." Caleb set down the carton and looked at his daughter like she'd just explained the tax code. "Who told you floating cereal is bad luck?" "Mommy did." He froze for half a second. He always did when Maya said things like that, things she could not possibly remember because she'd been 3 years old when Naomi died, and yet somehow they lived in her anyway, passed down in her bones. "Mommy was right," he said quietly. "Mommy was always right." "I know." He kissed the top of her head, poured the cereal first like a man following sacred instructions, and told her to eat fast because Mrs. Alvarez downstairs was watching her today, and Mrs. Alvarez didn't like waiting. Caleb drove a delivery van for a company called Prestige Courier, and the word prestige was the only fancy thing about it. He made deliveries to people who had more money than he would see in 3 lifetimes, and he made them for the kind of paycheck that meant checking the gas gauge before deciding whether to take the highway or the long way. He had a college degree sitting in a drawer somewhere, a degree in engineering, and a resume full of years that had gone nowhere after Naomi got sick and the medical bills came in like a tide that never went back out. He didn't complain. Complaining was a luxury, and he couldn't afford luxuries. He had Maya. He had a roof. He had the memory of a woman who had loved him more than he'd ever felt he deserved. That was enough. That had to be enough. That morning, his dispatcher, a heavy-set man named Dolan, who chewed toothpicks and never smiled, handed him a clipboard and said, "You got the Ashford estate today." "The what?" "Ashford, Victoria Ashford. You know who that is?" "Should I?" Dolan laughed around his toothpick. "Richest woman in the state, maybe the richest in the region. Ashford Holdings, real estate, banking, shipping, half of downtown. That family's got more money than God, and God's rich." He tapped the clipboard. "Signature required delivery. Something small, something valuable. Do not screw it up. You screw this up. We lose the account, and if we lose the account, I lose my job. And if I lose my job, guess whose job I take with me?" "Understood." "You better understand. Wear the good shirt." Caleb wore the good shirt. The Ashford estate sat 40 minutes outside the city, up in the hills, where the air felt different, and the houses hid behind iron gates and rows of trees planted specifically, so poor people couldn't see in. Caleb pressed a buzzer at a gate that probably cost more than his car, said his name and his company into a little brass speaker, and waited while a camera studied him, like it was deciding whether he was allowed to exist. The gate opened. The driveway went on so long he checked his GPS twice to make sure he hadn't gotten off the property. And then the house came into view, and Caleb, who did not impress easily, who had seen big houses before, actually slowed the van down. It wasn't a house. It was a monument. White stone columns, wings, stretching out on either side like the place was trying to hug the whole hillside. There were fountains. There were gardeners who looked up at the delivery van with the mild suspicion of men trained to look up at delivery vans. Caleb parked where a sign told him to park, grabbed the small padded envelope off the passenger seat, straightened his good shirt, and walked up marble steps toward two front doors that were taller than his apartment ceiling. A woman in a gray uniform opened the door before he could knock. Housekeeper. Older, silver-haired, careful eyes. "Delivery for Ms. Ashford," Caleb said. "Signature required. She's expecting it. Come in, she'll want to sign herself. She's particular about the ones from the auction house." Caleb stepped inside, and that was the moment. That was the exact second his life folded in half, the before and the after of it, the moment his shoe crossed the threshold onto that marble floor. Because the main hall of the Ashford mansion was built like a cathedral, and up the grand staircase hung above the landing where anyone entering the house could not possibly miss. It was an enormous portrait of a woman. His wife, Naomi. Caleb stopped so suddenly, the housekeeper nearly walked into him. "Sir." He didn't hear her. He was looking up at a painting of the woman he had married in a courthouse 8 years ago, in a suit he'd borrowed from his cousin. The woman he had held in a hospital bed while she got smaller and smaller. The woman he had buried on a gray Tuesday, while his 3-year-old daughter asked why mommy was sleeping in a box. The same face, the same warm brown eyes with that little tilt to them, the same smile that always looked like she knew something you didn't. And there, Caleb's whole body went cold there on her left cheek, near the corner of her mouth, the small, pale scar she'd gotten as a kid, falling off a bicycle. The scar he'd kissed 1,000 times. It was her. It was her. The padded envelope slipped out of his hand. He didn't notice. "Sir, are you all right? You've gone." "Who is that?" Caleb said. It didn't come out as a question. It came out as a demand, low and shaking from somewhere deep in his chest. The housekeeper followed his gaze up to the portrait, and something flickered across her face. Caution. "That's Miss Isabella, Ms. Ashford's younger sister." "No. Sir. No, that's not Isabella. That's Naomi. That's my wife." Caleb's voice climbed. "That's a picture of my wife. Why do you have a picture of my wife in this house?" The housekeeper took a step back. "Sir, I think you may be mistaken." "I'm not mistaken." Caleb walked toward the staircase, toward the portrait, his head tipped all the way back, and the closer he got, the worse it was, because now he could see the brushstrokes. The details, and every single detail was Naomi. The little chip on the edge of her front tooth she'd never gotten fixed. The way one eyebrow sat a hair higher than the other. "I buried this woman 3 years ago. I sat with her when she died. I know this face better than I know my own. Who painted this? Who is that woman?" "Sir, I need you to lower your voice." "Then somebody needs to tell me the truth." His shout rang off the marble and the high ceilings, and came back at him from 3 directions. And that was when a voice spoke from the top of the stairs. A woman's voice, cool and controlled, the voice of somebody who had never once in her life been made to wait for anything. "Marguerite, it's all right. Leave us." Caleb looked up. A woman was standing at the top of the grand staircase, one hand resting on the banister. She was maybe in her early 50s, tall, dressed in the kind of simple clothes that only look simple until you realize each piece costs a month's rent. Silver blonde hair pulled back. A face that was used to being photographed, used to being obeyed, used to being the most important person in every room she entered. Victoria Ashford. She started down the stairs, and her eyes were fixed not on the shouting stranger in her foyer, but on his face, studying it. And as she came down, step by step, something happened to that composed, controlled expression. It cracked. The color drained out of it. Her hand tightened on the railing until the knuckles went white. She looked for a moment like a woman who had seen a ghost. "Who are you?" she said, and her cool voice had a tremor in it now. "What is your name?" "Caleb Johnson. I deliver packages. I came to bring you a—" He gestured helplessly at the dropped envelope on the floor. "That doesn't matter. That painting matters. Who is that woman in the painting?" Victoria reached the bottom of the stairs. She was close to him now, close enough that Caleb could see her chest rising and falling too fast. She was staring at him like he was a puzzle that had just terribly solved itself. "That's my sister," she said. "Isabella. She's been gone 12 years. "Gone how?" Gone where? She disappeared. Victoria's voice was barely holding together. 12 years ago. She walked out of this house one night and never came back. We looked for her. You cannot imagine what we spent the private investigators the searches. We never found a single trace, not one. It was as though she vanished off the face of the earth. She swallowed. Mr. Johnson, why are you looking at a portrait of my missing sister and calling her your wife? Because she was my wife. That's impossible. Is it? Then explain the scar. Caleb pointed up at the painting, his hand shaking, his whole arm shaking. Right there, on her cheek. She got that when she was 9 years old. She fell off a purple bike and hit the curb, and she was embarrassed about it her whole life, and I told her 1,000 times it was the prettiest thing on her face. Explain how a painter you hired to paint your missing sister put a scar on her cheek that my wife had. Explain that to me. Victoria Ashford looked up at the portrait. She looked at the scar, and Caleb watched something break behind her eyes. She fell off her bicycle, Victoria whispered, when she was 9. On the drive out front. I was there. Our father was furious because it was a Christmas present, and she'd ruined it in a week. Her voice was going somewhere very far away. She cried for 2 days. Not about the scar, about the bicycle. She thought she'd disappointed him. The two of them stood there in the enormous silent hall, a billionaire and a delivery driver, both of them looking up at the face of a woman who could not be two people and somehow was. It's her, Victoria said. It came out of her like something tearing. Oh my God, it's her. It's really her. Where is she? Mr. Johnson, where is my sister? Is she alive? Where is she? Where is she? And Caleb had to say the thing he had said too many times, the thing that never got easier, no matter how many years passed. She's dead. Victoria Ashford's hand came up and covered her mouth. She died 3 years ago, Caleb said, and his own voice was breaking now because it turned out you could grieve a person all over again in front of a stranger. Cancer. It was fast. By the time we caught it, it was already there wasn't anything they could do. She was 34 years old. I held her hand. I was there. She's buried in a cemetery on the east side of the city under a headstone that says, Naomi Johnson, beloved wife and mother, because that's who she was. That's who she was to me. Victoria made a sound. It wasn't a word. It was the sound a person makes when a hope they've carried in secret for 12 years dies in a single sentence. She reached out and steadied herself on a small table, knocking a vase that wobbled and did not fall. 12 years, she said. 12 years I've been telling myself she was out there somewhere, alive. Angry at us maybe, hiding from us maybe, but alive. And you're telling me she's been dead for 3 years and I never knew. I never knew. I could have. Her composure was gone completely. Now the billionaire ice all melted away, and underneath it was just a woman who had lost her little sister twice in one afternoon. How did I not feel it? How does a person's sister die and they don't feel it? I don't know, Caleb said. I don't understand any of this. I don't understand why she's in a painting in your house with a different name. I don't understand why you're telling me she disappeared when she never told me she came from this. He looked around the vast hall, the columns, the chandeliers. She never told me any of this. My wife did the laundry in a machine down the hall from 4 other families. My wife clipped coupons. My wife worked doubles at a diner when I lost a job. My wife and I split a bus pass because we couldn't afford 2. And you're telling me she grew up here. She grew up here. Victoria's voice was hollow. She grew up with everything. Everything money could possibly buy. Then why would she leave it? Why would she leave all of this to clip coupons in a 2-room apartment with me? Victoria looked at him, and there was something in her look now. Something that would take Caleb a long time to fully understand, a mixture of grief and shame and a dawning terrible comprehension. I think, she said slowly, that's exactly the question I need to answer, for both of us. She straightened up. She wiped her eyes with the back of one hand, a gesture so ordinary and human it didn't seem to belong to a woman who owned half the city. And when she spoke again, some of the control had come back into her voice, but it was a different kind of control now, the control of someone deciding to do something difficult. "Mr. Johnson, Caleb, I know you came here to deliver a package, and I know I cannot even imagine what this is for you. But I need you to sit down with me. I need you to tell me about my sister. And I think—" She hesitated. "I think there are things I need to tell you too. Things you deserve to know. Things she should have told you herself, and I don't understand why she didn't, but if she can't tell you then it falls to me." Caleb stood in the middle of the hall, and every instinct he had told him to walk out. To grab the envelope off the floor, get the signature, get in the van, drive back to the city, pick up his daughter, and pretend this whole afternoon had never happened. Because whatever was on the other side of this conversation, he could already feel that it was going to change things. That it was going to take the Naomi he had loved and buried and hold her up to a new light, and he didn't know what he'd see. But then he thought about Maya, about the way she'd said Mommy did over a bowl of cereal that morning, about all the questions she was going to ask as she got older, questions about who her mother was, where she came from, what her family was like. Questions Caleb had never been able to answer because Naomi had never given him anything to answer them with. She'd always said her parents were dead. She'd always said she had no family. She'd always changed the subject so gently and so completely that he'd learned not to ask. Now he understood. She hadn't been an orphan. She'd been a runaway, and her family was standing in front of him in a house the size of a museum. "My daughter," Caleb said. "Naomi and I have a daughter. Maya. She's 6. Victoria Ashford went very still. "A daughter," she repeated. "She's got Naomi's eyes. She's got Naomi's stubbornness. She thinks floating cereal is bad luck because her mother told her so when she was 3 years old and it stuck." Caleb didn't know why he was telling this woman these things, except that the words were coming out of him now, and he couldn't seem to stop them. "She doesn't have anybody. On Naomi's side, I mean. I always told her that her mother's family was gone. Because that's what Naomi told me. I told my daughter she had no grandparents, no aunts, no cousins, nobody. And it turns out she has us," Victoria said quietly. "I don't know what you have," Caleb said, and there was an edge in it now, protective sharp. "I don't know you. I don't know this family. I don't know why my wife ran from all of this and never looked back, never called, never sent a letter, changed her name, and buried her whole past so deep I never found a crack in it in 8 years of marriage. People don't do that for no reason, Miss Ashford. People don't erase themselves for fun. Whatever she was running from, I need to know if it's something I need to protect my daughter from." The words hung in the air and Caleb watched them land. He watched Victoria Ashford flinch as if he'd struck her. "You're right to ask that," she said. "You're right to be careful. If I were you, I'd be careful too." She took a breath. "But I promise you, I swear to you, on my sister's memory, there is nothing in this family that would ever harm that child. Whatever Isabella was running from, and I'm beginning to understand it now, more than I ever let myself understand it before, it wasn't danger. Not the kind you're imagining. It was something else. It was something I think we did to her. Slowly. Over a lifetime. Without ever laying a hand on her. That doesn't make me feel better." "No, I don't imagine it does." They stood in silence. And then, from somewhere deeper in the house, a grandfather clock began to chime the hour, deep and slow. And Caleb realized he'd been standing in this stranger's foyer for the better part of half an hour, and that Dolan was going to be blowing up his phone about the signature, and that Maya needed to be picked up at 6, and that the whole ordinary machinery of his ordinary life was still turning, even as the ground came apart beneath his feet. "I have to go," Caleb said. "My job, my daughter. I can't just—" "Of course." Victoria moved quickly, snapping back into the competent woman who ran an empire. "The delivery. Give me the—" She looked around, spotted the envelope on the floor, and did something Caleb would remember for a long time afterward. She, Victoria Ashford, the richest woman in the state, bent down herself and picked it up off her own marble floor and held it out to him. "Your signature. Whatever you need. I'll sign it." "And Caleb," she caught his eyes. "Please, come back. Bring the no. Don't bring your daughter. Not yet. Not until you know everything. And not until you decide it's what you want. But come back. Tomorrow. The day after. Whenever you can. Let me tell you about your wife. Let me tell you who she was before she was Naomi. You loved her for 8 years, and you buried her not knowing half of who she was. Don't you want the rest?" And that was the thing that got him. That was the thing that wrapped around Caleb's heart and squeezed. Because he did. God help him, he wanted the rest. For 3 years, he had been living with a hole in the shape of his wife, and he had made peace with the fact that some of that hole would always stay empty, that there were parts of Naomi he would simply never get to have. And now this woman was standing in front of him, saying she could fill some of it in. That there was more of Naomi out there. More stories, more history, more of the person he loved, waiting in this enormous house like treasure in a vault. "You knew her as a girl," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. "I knew her as a baby," Victoria said, and her voice softened into something almost unbearable. "I'm 11 years older than she was. When she was born, I was the one who named her. Our mother couldn't decide, so she let me pick, and I picked Isabella because I'd read it in a book, and I thought it was the most beautiful name in the world. I taught her to read. I taught her to ride that bicycle, the one that gave her the scar. I used to sneak into her room at night when she had bad dreams." Victoria's eyes were wet again. And then she grew up, and she hated this family so much, she erased herself rather than stay in it. And I never understood why. Not really. I told myself I didn't understand. But I think I understood the whole time. I think I just couldn't stand to look at it. Caleb took the envelope from her hand. Their fingers didn't touch, but they were close, 2 people orbiting the same lost woman. "I'll come back," he said. Relief flooded Victoria's face. "Thank you. But I want to be clear about something." Caleb straightened, and there was a dignity in the way he stood, a man who had been underestimated his whole life and had learned to carry himself like it didn't matter. "I'm not coming back for your money. I'm not coming back to be part of your family. I don't want anything from you. I've raised that little girl for 3 years on a delivery driver's salary, and we've been just fine. We don't need saving. I'm coming back for one reason and one reason only, and that's because I loved your sister more than I've ever loved anything on this earth, and if there's more of her to know, I want to know it. That's all. That's the whole reason. Are we clear?" Victoria Ashford looked at this man, this stranger, this delivery driver in a good shirt, who had just walked into her house and detonated 12 years of her life, and who was now telling her in effect that he wanted nothing. She had to offer except the memory of a dead woman, and something moved across her face that Caleb couldn't read. It was respect. He would understand that later. In that moment, it was the first time in a very long time that anyone had stood in Victoria Ashford's home and wanted nothing from her, and it undid something in her chest. "We're clear," she said. "And Caleb, I understand now, a little, why she chose you." Caleb didn't answer that. He couldn't. His throat had closed up. He signed nothing in the end. Victoria took the envelope and told him she'd handle it with his company directly, that his job was safe, that she'd make a call, and Caleb understood that a call from Victoria Ashford was worth more than 100 deliveries. He would find out later that she'd told Dolan the Ashford account was extending a personal commendation for its driver, and that any concerns about the day's delivery should be directed to her personal office, which was a sentence that made Dolan choke on his toothpick and treat Caleb like royalty for a month. But all of that was later. For now, Caleb walked back out through those enormous front doors, down the marble steps, past the fountains and the gardeners, and got into his delivery van. He sat in the driver's seat for a full minute without starting the engine. Through the windshield, the great white house sat there in the afternoon light, and somewhere inside it, up above the grand staircase, his wife's face looked down over a hall she had grown up in and run from and never once mentioned. He thought about 100 small things all at once. He thought about the first time he'd met Naomi at a bus stop in the rain, when she'd had exactly no umbrella and no money and had asked to share his. He'd thought she was broke. She'd let him think it. She'd been sitting on a fortune, and she'd shared his cheap umbrella and eaten the $2 noodles he could afford, and never once, not one single time in 8 years, let on that she'd grown up in a palace. He thought about the way she'd flinch just slightly whenever anyone asked about her family. The way she'd say, "They're gone," in a voice that shut the door. He thought about how happy she'd been. That was the part that broke him sitting there in the van. She had been happy. In that little apartment doing laundry down the hall, clipping coupons, working doubles, she had been the happiest person he'd ever known. She used to sing while she cooked. She used to dance with Maya on her hip in the kitchen to no music at all. She used to look at Caleb across the dinner table, across a dinner of rice and beans, like he'd given her the whole world. And now he understood. He'd thought he was the poor man who'd gotten lucky to marry such a woman. He'd had it backwards the whole time. She was the one who'd walked away from everything. The money, the name, the mansion, the family, all of it, and chosen the rice and beans. Chosen the 2-room apartment. Chosen the man with the cheap umbrella. She had held the whole glittering world in her hand, and put it down, and picked up his instead, and called it enough. Called it more than enough. Called it home. Why? Caleb sat in the van and asked the windshield the question. And the question that came underneath it, the one that scared him, was worse. What did they do to her in that beautiful house that made walking away from all of it feel like freedom? He didn't have the answer. Not yet. But he was going to get it. He'd promised himself that the moment he looked up at that portrait. Whatever Naomi had carried alone, whatever she'd protected him, from whatever she'd protected Maya, from whatever secret she'd taken with her into the ground 3 years ago, he was going to carry it now. He owed her that. He owed her daughter that. He started the engine. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text from Mrs. Alvarez. A photo of Maya at the kitchen table, tongue out coloring something with fierce concentration. Under it, she says the drawing is for Daddy. She misses you. Caleb looked at his daughter's face on the little screen. Naomi's eyes, Naomi's stubborn set jaw, a face that carried a family and a history and a fortune that the child didn't even know existed. And he made a decision that would shape everything that came after. He was going to find out the truth. All of it. And when he did, when he understood exactly who Naomi had been, and exactly what she'd run from, he was going to sit his daughter down someday when she was old enough, and he was going to tell her the whole story. Not a version. Not the safe parts. The whole thing. Because Maya deserved to know that her mother hadn't been an orphan with no past. Her mother had been a young woman with everything who had looked at a world made entirely of gold and decided it was a cage. And who had loved a poor man and a rented apartment and a little girl more than all of it. Caleb put the van in drive and started the long way down the driveway, and behind him, the great house grew smaller in the mirror, and up above its grand staircase in a hall full of chandeliers, and the ghosts of a family's regrets, the painted eyes of Isabella Ashford, Naomi Johnson, beloved wife and mother, watched him go. He didn't know yet how much of his own understanding of his marriage was about to be turned over. He didn't know about the journal or the final letter or the DNA test or the nights he'd sit up talking with a billionaire until 3 a.m, trying to make sense of a woman they'd both loved and both in their different ways failed to fully know. He didn't know that the coldest, most powerful woman in the city was about to become, in the strangest and most unlikely way, the only other person on earth who understood exactly what he had lost. All he knew, driving down that hill with his daughter's photo glowing on the seat beside him, was that his wife had had a name before she had his. And that name was carved in gold above a staircase in a house he was going to come back to. He drove toward the city, toward Maya, toward the ordinary life Naomi had chosen over a kingdom. And with every mile the question turned over and over in his chest, the question that had already changed everything, and had only begun to do its work. Who were you, Naomi? Who were you really? He was going to find out. He owed her that much. He owed her everything. He came back on a Thursday 3 days later in his own car instead of the delivery van because it felt wrong somehow to drive up to that house in a vehicle with another man's company painted on the side. He'd traded shifts to make the afternoon free. He told Mrs. Alvarez he'd be late and slipped her an extra 20 he couldn't really spare. And he'd stood in front of his closet for a long time before deciding it didn't matter what he wore, because whatever he put on, he'd still be a delivery driver, walking into a palace, and pretending otherwise was a kind of lie he didn't have the stomach for. The gate opened before he even reached the buzzer. She'd been watching for him. Marguerite, the silver-haired housekeeper, met him at the door again, but her manner was different this time, softer, almost apologetic, the way people get around someone who's had a death in the family. She led him not to the great hall with the portrait, but to a smaller room off to the side, a study lined with books where a fire was going even though it wasn't cold, and Victoria Ashford was standing at the window with her back to the door. "He's here, ma'am," Marguerite said. "Thank you. Would you bring coffee?" "He takes it black." Victoria turned around. "You take it black. I remembered you saying it. The morning of. I remember odd things when I'm upset. I remember you said you drink it black because sugar's expensive, and once you get used to it plain, you never go back." "I did say that," Caleb said. "I don't remember saying it, but it sounds like me." "Sit, please." He sat. She sat across from him, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Two strangers bound together by a woman in the ground, both waiting for the other to be brave enough to start. It was Caleb who started. "You said there were things I deserve to know, so tell me. I've had 3 days to think about nothing else. I've barely slept. I keep looking at my daughter and seeing a whole family in her face that I never knew was there. So don't ease me into it. Don't manage me. Just tell me. Who was she? Who was Naomi before she was Naomi?" Victoria folded her hands in her lap. She had clearly rehearsed this, and just as clearly the rehearsal was falling apart the moment she needed it. "She was the youngest of 3, Victoria said. "There was me then, our brother Charles, then Isabella. 11 years between me and her. Our mother nearly died having her. The doctors said no more children after that, and I think in a way Isabella spent her whole childhood being reminded she'd nearly cost our mother her life. Not in words. Nobody ever said it to her face. But she felt it. Children feel those things. That's a hard thing to grow up under. Everything in that family was a hard thing to grow up under." Victoria's voice had gone flat, careful, the voice of someone stepping through a minefield in the dark. "Our father was... I loved him. I want to say that first because what I'm about to tell you might make you think I didn't. I loved him. He was brilliant, and he was charming, and when he decided to shine his attention on you, you felt like the most important person alive. But he built this family the same way he built his company. Everything had a purpose. Everyone had a role. And the role was decided the day you were born, and there was no negotiating it, and there was no failing at it." "What was Naomi's role?" Victoria almost smiled, and it was a terrible smile. She didn't have one. That was the problem. I was the eldest, I was the heir. I was groomed to run things, and I did. I run all of it now. Charles was the son, and so he got a different kind of grooming, the boards and the clubs and the connections. But Isabella came last, and she came unexpected, and by the time she was old enough to have a role assigned to her, our father had already decided what she was. She was the beautiful one, the decorative one, the one who would marry well. Marguerite came in with the coffee, set it down, and left without a word. Caleb didn't touch his. "Marry well," he repeated. "Marry well." Victoria wrapped both hands around her own cup, like she was cold, though the fire was blazing. From the time she was 15, Caleb, our father, was managing her the way you'd manage a merger. There was a family, the Prescott's, old money, older than ours, banking money going back 4 generations. They had a son, Gregory. And our father and Gregory's father had an understanding. Not a contract. Nothing so crude as a contract. But an understanding the way powerful men have understandings, that when the children came of age, the 2 families would be joined. "You're telling me your father arranged a marriage for her?" "I'm telling you, my father spent 10 years arranging the conditions under which she would arrive at that marriage, believing it was her own idea." Victoria's jaw tightened. He didn't drag her to an altar. He was far more sophisticated than that. He controlled who she met, where she went to school, which friends were acceptable and which weren't. He made sure that every road in her life led toward Gregory Prescott, and made sure every other road had a wall at the end of it. And she was young, and she was sheltered, and for a long time, she didn't even see the walls. You don't see a cage if you've never known anything else. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But she saw it eventually. She saw it eventually. Victoria looked into the fire. She was 19. There was a scholarship program our foundation ran, still runs for young people from the city. Bright kids, no money. Once a year, we'd bring some of them up here for a reception, get our pictures taken, handing out checks, feel good about ourselves. Isabella was supposed to smile for the cameras. Instead, she spent the whole evening in the corner talking to a boy her own age, a boy from nothing, a boy who was going to be the first person in his family to finish college. I don't even remember his name. It doesn't matter. Nothing happened between them. But something happened inside her. She came to me that night. She used to come to me when she couldn't sleep even at 19. And she sat on the end of my bed and she said, "Vicky, that boy tonight talked to me like I was a person, not like I was an Ashford, like I was just a girl. Do you know how strange that is? Nobody in my whole life has ever talked to me like I was just a girl." Caleb was very still, and I said something to her that I will regret until the day I die. Victoria went on, and her voice had dropped almost to a whisper. I said, "That's because you're not just a girl, Isabella. You're an Ashford. That comes with a life, and the life is a good one, and you should be grateful for it." I said it kindly. I thought I was being loving. I thought I was protecting her from wanting things she couldn't have. And I watched something in her face, just close, like a door. She said, "You're right. I'm sorry. It was a silly thing to say." And she went back to her room. And I told myself I'd done my job as her big sister. The fire popped. Neither of them looked at it. What I'd actually done, Victoria said, was teach her that even the person who loved her most in the world thought her only value was the name she carried. And I think that was the night she started planning to leave. She just took another 2 years to work up the courage. Caleb sat back. His coffee had gone cold, and he still hadn't touched it. There was a pressure building behind his eyes, and he blinked it back because he'd promised himself he wasn't going to fall apart in this woman's study. "You said she disappeared 12 years ago. So she was, what, 21? 21. She'd finished a degree our father chose for her, art history, decorative, appropriate, useless in his opinion, which was exactly why it was allowed. The engagement to Gregory Prescott was going to be announced at her 22nd birthday. Everything was arranged. The venue, the guest list, the ring. And 3 weeks before she walked out of this house one night with a single bag, and she never came back. Just like that. Just like that. No note, no warning. Her car was found at the train station downtown 2 days later, and after that, nothing. 12 years of nothing. Victoria's hands were shaking now, and she pressed them flat against her knees to stop them. Our father hired the best investigators money could buy. And I mean the best Caleb men who find people who don't want to be found for governments, for people you've never heard of. They found nothing. She'd planned it too well. She must have been saving for months. Cash probably. A new name. She knew that if she used a single credit card, made a single call, our father would find her and bring her back, and once he brought her back, there'd be no second escape. So she vanished completely. She erased Isabella Ashford as thoroughly as if that girl had never existed, and became Naomi. Victoria looked at him. "Where did she get the name, do you know, I've wondered. All these years, if I'd known she was alive, I'd have wondered what name she was living under. What was she like as Naomi? Was she happy? Was she safe? Did anyone love her?" And there it was. The question underneath all the other questions. She was happy, Caleb said, and saying it out loud in that room to that woman was the strangest kind of grief, because it was a comfort and a knife at the same time. She was the happiest person I ever knew. And somebody loved her. I loved her. I loved her every single day. Ms. Ashford and I told her so. And I know she believed me because she used to say it was the thing that surprised her most about her whole life. That somebody could love her and want nothing from it. She said that to me once early on. We'd been together maybe a year. We were lying in bed in this terrible apartment. The walls were so thin we could hear the neighbors argue, and she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "You don't want anything from me, do you?" And I said, "What could you possibly have that I'd want? You're broker than I am." And she started laughing, and then she started crying, and she wouldn't tell me why. Now I know why. I'd just given her the only thing she'd ever wanted, and she couldn't tell me she'd been looking for it her whole life. Victoria's composure finally broke all the way. She put her face in her hands, and she wept silently, her shoulders shaking, and Caleb sat across from her, not knowing what to do, because you don't reach out and comfort a billionaire you've known for 3 days, and yet the woman was crying over the same person he'd cried over 1,000 times, and that made her in that moment something closer than a stranger. "I'm sorry," Victoria said finally, wiping her face, furious with herself. I don't do this in front of people." "You can do it in front of me," Caleb said. "I'm the one person who won't sell it to a newspaper." That got a wet, startled laugh out of her. "No, I don't suppose you would." She got up, went to the window, gathered herself. When she turned back around, she was more composed but softer than before, some wall between them lower than it had been. "There's more you should know," she said. "And this part is harder for me because it's the part where I have to tell you what kind of family she ran from. Not the polished version, the real one." She sat back down. "Our brother, Charles, Isabella's brother, your daughter's uncle. Though God knows what that word will ever mean now, Charles is not a good man, Caleb. I'll say it plainly. Our father is dead now, 6 years gone, and Charles runs his half of things, and Charles is exactly the kind of man our father wanted to build, and I refused to become. When Isabella disappeared, do you know what Charles was most concerned about? Not whether she was safe, not whether she was alive. He was concerned about the Prescotts, about the deal, about what it would look like. He actually said to me in this very house that if she was determined to embarrass the family, we should let the investigators find her and then quietly make sure she understood the cost of coming home. Those were his words. The cost of coming home. Caleb's whole body had gone rigid. Meaning what? Meaning he wanted to threaten her. His own sister, to frighten her back into line. Victoria's mouth was a hard line. I told him if he ever spoke about her that way again, I'd cut him out of the foundation and the family both. I had the power to do it even then, and he knew it and he backed down. But I never forgot it. And I want you to understand something because you asked me at the door whether there was anything in this family your daughter needed protecting from, and I told you no, and that wasn't entirely honest. There isn't anything that would hurt her. But there is Charles. And Charles is going to have to be handled very, very carefully, because if he learns that Isabella had a child who is by blood an Ashford, he is not going to see a little girl. He is going to see a complication. Or worse, he's going to see leverage. Leverage for what? There's a trust. Victoria said it flatly, like she was confessing to something. Our father set it up decades ago. It's substantial, I won't tell you the number. It doesn't matter, it's more than a person can spend in 10 lifetimes. And the terms are old-fashioned and specific the way our father liked things. The trust passes to the direct descendants of his 3 children. Me, Charles, Isabella. Charles has no children. I have no children. Isabella was presumed dead, but never legally declared dead because I refused to sign the papers. I refused for 12 years to let them declare her dead. Her voice cracked and she pushed through it. And now it turns out I was right not to. Because Isabella has a child, which means your daughter Caleb Maya is very likely the sole heir to a fortune that at this moment my brother believes is going to come to him. The room was silent except for the fire. Caleb stood up. He couldn't stay sitting. He walked to the window, then away from it, running a hand over his face, his heart going like a hammer. "No," he said. "No. I told you. I don't want your money. Maya doesn't need your money. We're not..." I'm not going to drag my daughter into some fight over a dead man's fortune with a man who threatened her mother. Absolutely not. Forget it. Forget I ever came here. Caleb, I mean it. He rounded on her, and there was real fear in it now. The specific fear of a father who spent 6 years keeping one small person safe against long odds and has just been told there's a new threat he can't see. You think I want that? You think I've spent 3 years scraping by, working doubles, coming home so tired, I fall asleep helping her with her homework, and the reason I did all that was so someday she could inherit a pile of money that comes attached to a man who wanted to threaten his own sister? I don't want that. I want her safe. Money like that isn't safety. Money like that is a target painted on my little girl's back. Victoria didn't argue. She let him stand there with his chest heaving, and she waited until the worst of it had passed, and then she said very quietly, "You're right." He blinked. What? You're right. That's exactly what it is, a target. She looked up at him. I've lived my whole life inside that money. Caleb and I can tell you, you've understood in 3 days what most people never understand at all. It isn't safety. My father built the biggest, most beautiful cage in the state, and he called it a legacy, and he made his children live in it, and one of them loved it, and one of them turned into a smaller version of him, and one of them, the youngest, the one who saw clearest, one of them ran so far and so fast that she'd rather have been dead to us than live in it one more day. You think I don't understand why you're afraid I'm the last person alive who watched what that money did to this family up close? Of course you should be afraid. Caleb sat back down slowly. Then why did you tell me? If you understand all that, why tell me about the trust at all? You could have just told me about her childhood, told me the sweet parts, let me leave. I never would have known about any of this. Because you asked me for the truth, Victoria said. The whole thing, not a version, not the safe parts. You said that at the door, and you meant it, and I decided the moment you said it that I owed it to you, and I owed it to her. Isabella spent her whole life being managed by people who decided which truths she was allowed to have. Her father managed her. I managed her. God help me that night on my bed. I will not do to her husband what we did to her. You get all of it, even the parts that frighten you. Especially the parts that frighten you. And then you get to decide what to do with them. You, not me. That's the whole difference between me and the man who built this house. He decided for everyone. I'm done deciding for people. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Something was shifting in how he saw her, and he wasn't sure he wanted it to. It was easier when she was just the rich woman with the portrait. It was easier when he could be angry. Okay, he said finally. Okay. Let's say I believe you. Let's say I believe you're trying to do right by her. What happens now? Practically. There's a brother who doesn't know my daughter exists, and if he finds out, she's going to be a, what did you call it, a complication. So what stops him from finding out? Right now, nothing, Victoria admitted. Right now, 4 people in the world know that Isabella had a daughter. Yumi Marguerite and Mrs. Alvarez, I assume. And your daughter herself. Charles doesn't know Isabella is even dead yet. He doesn't know any of this. And that gives us time. But it doesn't give us forever, because these things get out, Caleb. Money makes people talk. And I would very much rather Charles heard about Maya from me on my terms with lawyers and protections already in place than stumble across it on his own. Protections. Caleb said the word like he was testing whether it was real. There are ways to protect a child in her position. Trusts within trusts. Legal structures. Ways to make sure she's provided for without being exposed. Ways to make sure the money can't be used against her, or used to take her, or used as leverage over you. I have spent 30 years learning how money works at this level, Caleb. I know every trick in the book because I grew up watching my father invent half of them. I can build a wall around that little girl that Charles will never get over. But I can only do it if you let me. And I understand completely if you don't trust me enough to let me. You've known me 3 days. I'd be a fool to expect your trust. Caleb was quiet for a long time. The fire burned down a little. She used to say something, he said finally. Naomi, when Maya was a baby and money was tight and I'd get scared about it, I'd lie awake doing math in my head. You know, how are we going to make rent? How are we going to pay for the doctor? And Naomi would put her hand on my chest and she'd say, Caleb, stop counting. The counting is the disease. And I never knew what she meant by it. The counting is the disease. I thought it was just something to say, but it wasn't. Was it? She grew up in a family where everything got counted, where she got counted, where her whole worth was a number in a trust. And she got out and she spent the rest of her life trying not to count anything ever again. Victoria's eyes filled. That sounds exactly like something she'd say. God, that's exactly what she'd mean. So here's my problem. Caleb went on, and his voice was steadier now, thinking his way through it out loud. If I let you build your walls and your trusts, if I let Maya become an heir, I'm putting her right back inside the thing her mother died to keep her out of. Naomi ran from the counting. And you're telling me the way to protect her daughter is to count her too. Count her real careful, count her with the best lawyers, but count her all the same. And I don't know if I can do that to her. I don't know if I have the right. And if you do nothing, Victoria said gently, and Charles finds her anyway, with no walls up at all, then she's inside the thing and unprotected. That's the trap, Caleb. That's the terrible thing about this kind of money. You can't opt your daughter out of being an Ashford by blood. She already is one. That was decided the day she was born, same as it was decided for Isabella. The only choice you actually have is whether she faces it defended or undefended. You don't get to choose whether she's in the cage. You only get to choose whether she has a key. Caleb closed his eyes. When he opened them, there was something new in his face, a kind of exhausted resolve. I need to think, he said. I can't decide this today. This is my daughter's whole life. I can't decide it in an afternoon, in a room I've never been in before with a woman I met on Tuesday. I need to go home. I need to look at her. I need to think. Of course. Victoria stood when he stood. Take all the time you need. There's no clock on this that I can see, not yet. Charles suspects nothing. And Caleb... She hesitated, and then she said something that cost her. He could tell it cost her. Whatever you decide, even if you decide to walk out of here and never come back and keep her from all of us forever, I'll respect it. I won't fight you. I won't send lawyers after you. If you decide the safest thing for that little girl is to never know this family exists, I will spend the rest of my life pretending I never met you, and I'll take the secret to my grave that my sister's child is out there somewhere, living free of all of it. Because that's what Isabella would have wanted, and I failed her once by not listening, and I don't intend to fail her twice. Caleb stared at her. Of all the things she could have said, that was the one he hadn't been prepared for. The rich woman, the one with all the power, all the lawyers, all the money, offering to give up the only living piece of her dead sister, if that was what the sister would have wanted. It was the first moment he really believed her. You'd do that, he said. You'd let me walk out and take her and disappear. I would hate it, Victoria said. It would break what's left of my heart. But yes, I would do it. Because loving someone isn't the same as keeping them, Caleb. My father never understood that. It's the whole reason he lost her. I'd rather lose Maya to freedom than keep her in a cage and call it love. I learned that lesson at Isabella's expense. I don't need to learn it twice. Caleb picked up his cold coffee finally and drank it in one long swallow because his mouth had gone dry and he needed to do something with his hands. Then he set the cup down and looked at this woman, his wife's sister, his daughter's aunt, the richest and most powerful person he'd ever stood in a room with, who had just handed him more power over her own heart than he'd ever expected to hold. There's a journal, he said. Victoria went still. What? Naomi kept a journal, for years. I never read it. It was hers. It felt wrong, and after she died, I couldn't. I put it in a box with her things, and I put the box in the closet, and I never opened it. I couldn't. He swallowed. But if there's anything in there, anything about who she was or why she left or what she wanted for Maya, it'd be in there. In her own words. Not your version, not my version. Hers. Caleb! Victoria's voice was barely working. Would you— I have no right to ask this, but would you read it? Not for me, for yourself, for your daughter, whenever you're ready. But if there's anything in it about the family, about what she wanted— I'll read it, Caleb said. That's what I'm going to do tonight. I'm going to go home, and I'm going to put my daughter to bed, and then I'm going to take that box down from the closet, and I'm going to read my wife's journal for the first time in 3 years. He drew a breath that shook a little. And then I'll know what she wanted, in her own words. And that's how I'll decide. Not on your lawyers and not on your walls, on whatever she wrote. Because she's the only one who has the right to decide this, and the only way she gets a vote is if I read what she left behind. Victoria nodded, unable to speak. Caleb moved toward the door, then stopped his hand on the frame and turned back. One more thing. And I need you to be straight with me because everything depends on it. He fixed her with a look. This brother, Charles. When Naomi ran 12 years ago, you said the investigators never found her. You said she planned it perfectly. But you also said the investigators your father hired were the best in the world, the kind who find anybody. His eyes narrowed. So which is it? Was she really that good at hiding? Or did somebody at some point actually find her and decide not to say? Victoria Ashford's face did something complicated. I don't know, she said slowly. I've asked myself that for 12 years. She was clever, but she was 21, and she'd never lived a day in the real world. And those men were very, very good. She met his eyes. I always assumed she just got lucky, or got good, or both. But you're asking the right question, Caleb, because if someone found her and never told me, then someone in this family has known where Isabella was for years. And let me grieve a sister I could have gone to, and let me believe she was lost when she was only an hour's drive away. Her voice dropped. And if that's true, if someone knew, then I need to find out who, because whoever it was doesn't just owe me an explanation. They took 12 years from me. 12 years I could have had my sister back. The fire cracked in the silence. Caleb held her gaze a moment longer, and then he nodded once and walked out down the long hall past the great staircase and the portrait of the woman they'd both loved and both in their different ways failed to know, and out the enormous doors into the fading light, carrying a question. Now that was even heavier than the one he'd come in with, driving home toward his sleeping daughter and a box in a closet he had not been able to open for 3 years and was tonight finally going to. He got Maya to bed at 8:30 later than usual because she'd wanted 3 stories instead of 1, and he hadn't had the heart to say no. He'd sat on the edge of her bed longer than he needed to, after she fell asleep, watching her breathe, tracing with his eyes. The face that was so much her mother's, it sometimes stopped his heart. Naomi's daughter, Isabella's daughter. An heir to a fortune sleeping under a blanket with a cartoon fox on it that Caleb had bought second-hand for $4. Then he'd gone to the closet. The box was where he'd left it 3 years ago, high on the shelf, taped shut. A plain cardboard box with Naomi written on the side in his own handwriting, from the worst week of his life. He got it down. His hands weren't steady. He carried it to the kitchen table, and he sat there with it for a long time before he could make himself cut the tape. Inside were the things he hadn't been able to give away. A cardigan she used to wear that had stopped smelling like her about a year in, though he'd checked again and again, hoping. A cheap bracelet Maya had made her out of plastic beads. A hospital bracelet Caleb had cut off her wrist himself and couldn't throw away. And underneath all of it, wrapped in a scarf, a journal, thick, worn, soft at the corners, a plain brown cover with no writing on it. Caleb took it out and set it on the table in the pool of light from the single overhead bulb, and he looked at it for a long, long time. Then he opened it. The first entries were old. The dates went back further than he'd expected, years before he'd met her. The handwriting in the early pages was smaller, tighter, more careful, a girl's handwriting still learning to be a woman's. And the first entry that stopped him cold was dated a little over 12 years earlier, and it read in a hand pressed so hard into the page the pen had nearly torn it. Tomorrow I stop being her. I don't know who I'll be, but I know I can't be her one more day, or I'll die. Not a real death. Worse. The kind where you keep walking around but there's nobody home behind your eyes anymore. I've seen it happen to people in this family. I won't let it happen to me. Caleb read it 3 times. Her. Isabella. Naomi had written about herself in the third person, about the self she was leaving behind, like Isabella was a coat she was taking off. He kept reading. The entries from the first year after she ran were sparse and frightened and heartbreaking. She wrote about a bus station in a city Caleb had never known she'd passed through. She wrote about a week she'd spent too scared to sleep in a room with a lock she didn't trust. She wrote about the exact moment she'd chosen the name Naomi from a book. My favorite book, The Woman Who Lost Everything and Kept Walking. Johnson. I'll figure out later. She'd taken the name of a fictional woman who kept walking, and Caleb sat at his kitchen table at 9 o'clock at night and put his hand over his mouth and made a sound he was glad his daughter was asleep to miss. She wrote about being hungry. She wrote about the first job she got washing dishes, and how her hands, which had never done a day's work, cracked and bled, and how she'd cried in the walk-in freezer where nobody could see, and how she'd gone back out and finished her shift. She wrote, I have never in my life been so tired or so scared or so hungry. And I have never in my life been so free. Nobody here knows my name. Nobody wants anything from me. When I earn $1, it's mine because I earned it, not because I was born. I would rather be this tired and this free than rested and owned. I would rather be nobody than be in Ashford one more day. Caleb turned the pages carefully, like they might crumble, and he watched his wife's whole hidden life unspool in her own hand. The bad years. The lonely years. And then, about 3 years into the journal, an entry that made his chest seize because he recognized the date. Met a man at a bus stop today. Shared his umbrella. He was kind. He assumed I was as broke as he was, and I let him assume it because it was the truest thing anyone has believed about me in years. His name is Caleb. He gave me half his noodles. He has nothing, and he gave me half. I don't think he even noticed he did it. I've known men with everything who never gave me half of anything. I can't stop thinking about him. Caleb read his own name in his dead wife's handwriting, and put the journal down, and got up from the table, and stood at the sink for a while, with the water running over his hands, not washing anything, just kneading the ground to stop moving. Then he came back and sat down and kept reading, because he'd promised himself he'd read it all, and because he suddenly desperately wanted to know how she'd seen him. How she'd seen the whole thing he'd thought was so ordinary and had turned out to be to her a miracle. She'd seen everything. She'd seen him more clearly than he'd ever seen himself. She wrote about the way he saved the good parts of the meal for her without seeming to notice he was doing it. She wrote about how he never once asked her about her past, and how at first she'd thought he was incurious, and then she'd understood he simply took her exactly as she was standing in front of him, and how nobody had ever done that in her whole life. She wrote about a year into knowing him. He doesn't want a single thing from me except for me to be all right. I keep waiting for the catch. There's no catch. There has never in my life been a no catch. I think I love him. I think I'm going to marry this man if he'll have me. And I'm never going to tell him where I came from, because the second I do, I stop being Naomi to him, and I become her, and I'd rather die than become her again. He fell in love with a woman at a bus stop. I won't turn that woman into an Ashford. Not even for him. Especially not for him. And there it was. The answer to the question Caleb had carried up the stairs of that mansion. Why she'd never told him. It wasn't that she didn't trust him. It was that telling him would have killed the very thing she'd run all that way to become. She hadn't hidden Isabella from Caleb. She'd killed Isabella for Caleb so that the woman he loved could be real. He was crying now, and not fighting it. The kitchen was silent, except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the sound of a grieving man turning pages. He read about their wedding. The courthouse, the borrowed suit she'd noticed the suit was borrowed, and loved him more for wearing it proudly. He read about the terror and joy of finding out she was pregnant. And then he came to the entries about Maya, and these were different because the handwriting changed. It got looser, happier. There were whole entries that were just lists of small things Maya had done that day, the first time she laughed, the first tooth, the way she grabbed Caleb's finger and wouldn't let go. Naomi had written down everything, hoarding the ordinary like treasure, a woman who'd grown up in a palace and finally found something worth keeping. And then near the back, an entry that changed the temperature in the room. It was dated only a few months before she'd gotten sick, before any of them knew. And it was longer than the others, and the handwriting was pressed hard again, the way it had been the night before she ran, and it began. I did something today I swore I'd never do. I looked them up. My family. I don't know why. Maya, I think. Maya is why. I keep looking at my daughter and thinking someday she'll want to know where she comes from. Someday it won't be enough that I ran. She'll have a right to know she has a grandmother's eyes, a family, a history. I ran to save myself, but I don't have the right to erase all of it for her. So I looked. Caleb's pulse was pounding. He gripped the edge of the table. My father is dead. 6 years now, the article said. I felt I don't know what I felt. Not nothing. But not what a daughter should feel. He built a beautiful prison, and I don't mourn the warden. God forgive me. My brother Charles runs half of it now, and by the photographs he has become exactly what I always knew he would become. And Victoria, the pen had stopped there. There was a gap. When it resumed, the ink was slightly different, like she'd come back to it later in a different mood in the middle of a different night. Victoria runs the rest. And here is the thing I can't stop thinking about. Of all of them, she's the only one I miss. She's the only one who ever loved me, even when she loved me wrong. She named me. She taught me to read. The night before I ran, I stood in her doorway and watched her sleep, and I almost woke her up to say goodbye, and I didn't, because I knew she'd try to stop me, and I knew that if anyone in the world could talk me out of saving my own life, it was her. I loved her too much to say goodbye to her. That's the truth. I could leave everyone else. I almost couldn't leave Vicky. Caleb had to stop again. He thought about Victoria in her study, saying I used to sneak into her room at night when she had bad dreams, not knowing that her sister had stood in her doorway one last time and chosen love over goodbye. He read on, and the next lines were the ones that made everything after possible. I've decided something. I'm not going to contact them. Not now. It's too dangerous. While Charles is who he is, he'd see Maya as a piece on a board, not a child, and I won't hand my daughter to that. But I'm not going to erase them either. I'm going to write it down. All of it. Who I really am, where I came from, the whole truth, so that if anything ever happens to me, Caleb will know, and Maya will know, and she can choose for herself when she's grown, whether she wants any part of them. I won't make the choice for her the way my father made every choice for me. I'll leave her the truth and let her decide. That's the difference. That's the whole difference between what my father did and what I'll do. He handed me a life with no choice in it. I'll hand my daughter a truth and every choice in the world. And then the last long entry, and Caleb knew as he read it that this was the thing Victoria had been unknowingly asking for: the vote, the wish, the answer. If you're reading this, Caleb, and I'm not there, and I hope to God I am there. I hope I'm an old woman and you find this and we laugh about it, but if I'm not, then here is what I want you to know. Go to Victoria. Only Victoria. Not Charles, never Charles. Vicky loved me. Vicky will love Maya. She loved me wrong once, but she has the kind of heart that learns, and losing me will have taught her I have to believe that. Tell her I forgave her a long time ago for the thing she said the night I told her about the boy from the city. Tell her it wasn't her fault. She was raised in the cage same as me. She just never found the door. Tell her I didn't run from her. I ran from the cage. And tell her I want Maya to know her. Carefully. On our terms, not theirs. But I don't want my daughter to grow up thinking she came from nowhere. She came from somewhere. She came from a family that got so much wrong, and one woman in it who got the important thing right. Let Maya have her aunt. Let Vicky have something of me back. It's the only thing I own that's worth leaving anyone. Caleb closed the journal. He sat in his kitchen for a long time with his hand flat on the worn brown cover, and he cried the way you cry when grief and gratitude come at the same time, and there's no separating them, because she'd left him a map. 3 years he'd been navigating in the dark, guessing at what she'd have wanted, and all along the answer had been in a box in his closet written in her own hand. Go to Victoria. Let Maya have her aunt. Let Vicky have something of me back. She'd known. Somehow, months before she got sick without any idea what was coming, she'd known enough to write it all down and leave him a set of instructions for a future she'd hoped never to be absent from. She'd made the choice she'd sworn to make. She'd handed her daughter the truth and every choice in the world. He didn't sleep that night. Near dawn he made coffee and sat with it and read parts of it again, and by the time the sun came up, he knew what he was going to do. Not because Victoria had lawyers or walls, because Naomi had asked him to. Because his wife's last written wish was that their daughter would know the one good person in that terrible family, and that the one good person would get to hold a living piece of the sister she'd lost. He called Victoria at 8. She answered on the first ring, and he understood she'd probably slept as little as he had. I read it, he said. The journal. I read all of it. Silence on the line, then carefully, and she left instructions. His voice was rough from the long night. She wrote it all down months before she got sick. Who she was, why she ran all of it. She wrote it down for me and for Maya, so we could choose for ourselves what to do about your family. She said she didn't have the right to erase you for Maya, even though she erased you for herself. She wanted Maya to be able to choose. He drew a breath, and she left a message. For you. He heard Victoria's breath catch. She said, I'm going to read it to you exactly because you should have it in her words, not mine. He opened the journal to the page he'd marked with a torn corner, and he read it to her. All of it. Tell her I forgave her a long time ago. Tell her it wasn't her fault. She was raised in the cage same as me, she just never found the door. Tell her I didn't run from her. I ran from the cage. He read the whole thing slowly, his voice breaking in places, and on the other end of the line, he could hear Victoria Ashford, the most powerful woman in the state, coming apart entirely, a sound of such raw and total grief that Caleb had to stop twice to let her get through it. When he finished, there was a long silence, just the sound of her weeping and trying to master it. She forgave me, Victoria finally managed. 12 years I've lain awake over that night. Over what I said. I was so sure that was the thing that broke it. That if I'd just said something else, if I'd just been braver, she'd never have, and she forgave me. She forgave me years ago. She wrote it down, and she carried it, and she meant for me to have it. A shuddering breath. Caleb, I don't have the words. You've just given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. My sister forgave me, and I never got to know it until now. There's more, Caleb said. The part that matters for Maya. She wrote she said she wanted Maya to know you. She used your name, not Charles, she was very clear, never Charles, but you. She said, and I'm reading it again, let Maya have her aunt. Let Vicky have something of me back. It's the only thing I own that's worth leaving anyone. The sound Victoria made then wasn't grief anymore. It was something else. It was the sound of a person receiving a gift they'd never dared hope for. She wanted that, Victoria whispered. She wanted me to know Maya. She chose it. After everything, after all of it, Caleb, are you sure? Are you sure you want to honor that? You don't have to. This is her wish. But you're the one who has to live it. You're the one who has to trust me, and I've done nothing to earn. I'm sure, Caleb said. And he was. The long night had burned the last of his doubt out of him. I told you I'd let her decide. Well, she decided. She decided months before she died in her own hand, knowing exactly who all of you were. She's the only person who has the right to make this call, and she made it. So we're going to do what she asked. Maya's going to know her aunt. Carefully. On our terms, she was clear about that too. On our terms, not theirs. But she's going to know you. Victoria was quiet, gathering herself. When she spoke again, there was something new underneath the emotion, something firmer, and Caleb recognized it as the sound of a person accepting a responsibility so large it changes them. "Then I'm going to earn it," she said. "Every day. I failed her once, Caleb, and she forgave me for it anyway, and I am not going to waste that forgiveness. I'm going to be the aunt she wanted for that little girl if it's the last useful thing I do with my life. And I'm going to protect her. The walls I told you about, I'm going to build them, but I'm going to build them the way Naomi would have wanted, not to trap her, to keep the wolves out. There's a difference, and I know it now." "There's one more thing in here," Caleb said, "and it changes things. I need to tell you about it, and I need you to be sitting down." "I'm sitting. That question you couldn't answer yesterday, about whether somebody found her and never told you." Caleb turned to a page near the very end, one he'd read 4 times in the gray light of morning, and still couldn't quite believe. She wrote something, about 2 years before she died. Listen. "A man came to the diner today. Not a customer. He sat in my section, and he didn't order anything, and he watched me, and when I came to take his order, he said my name, my real name. He said Isabella, very quietly, just to see if I'd flinch. I didn't. I looked him dead in the eye and I said, 'You've got the wrong girl, sir.' And I walked away and I didn't drop a single plate, and I have never been so proud of myself or so afraid in my life." He left a $100 bill on an empty table and he left. He works for Charles. I know he works for Charles because I know that look. I grew up around men with that look. So they found me. At least one of them found me. And they didn't drag me back, and they didn't tell Vicky I was alive. Which means Charles has known for years, and he's keeping it to himself. And I can't for the life of me understand why, unless it's the trust. Unless keeping me lost is worth more to him than finding me." The line went utterly silent. "Victoria," Caleb said. "You still there?" He knew. Her voice had gone cold and flat and terrible. Charles knew she was alive, for years. A man of his found her and reported back to him, and my brother sat on it. He let me grieve. He let me lie awake for a decade not knowing. He let our father die believing his youngest child had vanished off the earth. And the whole time Charles knew exactly where she was, because a lost Isabella meant no heir, and no heir meant the trust flowed to him. Caleb could hear her breathing hard and controlled. He didn't just fail to look for her, Caleb. He found her and buried the knowledge. To protect a fortune. My God. My own brother. That's what she thought, Caleb said quietly. In her own words. She figured it out 2 years before she died, and she never told anybody because who was she going to tell? She was Naomi. She couldn't exactly walk into a police station. "She told you," Victoria said. "She told you now, in this journal. She's telling both of us right now." And the grief in her voice had crystallized into something harder, cleaner, more dangerous. "Caleb, do you understand what this means? If Charles found Isabella years ago and hid it to protect his claim on the trust, then the moment he learns Maya exists, he's not going to see a complication. He's going to see the one thing standing between him and a fortune he's been guarding in the dark for a decade. He hid a living woman to keep that money. I don't want to think about what he'd be willing to do about a living child." The kitchen felt very cold suddenly. Caleb looked toward the hallway, toward the room where his daughter was still sleeping under a blanket with a cartoon fox on it, and every protective instinct in his body came up at once like a wall. "Then he can't find out," Caleb said. "Not until your walls are up. Not until Maya's protected. You understand me, Victoria. He does not find out about my daughter until you've built something around her that he can't get through." "He won't," Victoria said. "I swear it to you. On Isabella's memory, on her forgiveness, on the only thing I have left of her, Charles will not touch that child. But Caleb..." And here her voice dropped, and there was steel in it now. The steel of a woman who had spent 30 years learning exactly how her family's power worked, and had just decided to turn all of it toward a single purpose. "I'm not only going to protect Maya from him. I'm going to find out the truth. I'm going to find the man who found her. I'm going to find out exactly what Charles knew, and exactly when he knew it. Because if my brother knowingly hid my living sister from me for years to protect money, then everything changes. The trust, the family, all of it. And I am going to make him answer for every single one of those years he stole from me. Caleb closed the journal and held it in both hands, his wife's whole hidden self resting in his palms, and he understood that the reading of it had not ended anything. It had started something. Naomi had left a map, and the map led not just to a reunion between a little girl and her aunt, but straight into the dark heart of the family. She'd died to escape to a brother who had chosen money over his own blood, and a secret he'd kept buried for over a decade, and a truth that was about to come up out of the ground whether Charles Ashford wanted it to or not. Victoria moved fast, but she moved carefully, the way a person moves who has decided to fight a war and knows that the first mistake will be the last one they're allowed. The first thing she did was nothing at all, nothing visible, nothing Charles could catch wind of. She didn't call a lawyer. She didn't file a paper. She spent 4 days doing what looked from the outside like a woman going about her ordinary business, and what was underneath the quiet assembling of everything she'd need before she made a single move her brother could see. She called Caleb on the 4th night after Maya was asleep. "I want to tell you what I'm doing," she said, "before I do any of it, because I meant what I said. No more deciding for people. This affects your daughter, so you get a vote at every step, and if you tell me to stop, I stop." "I'm listening." There are 2 things happening at once, and they have to stay separate as long as possible. The first is protection, building the walls around Maya. That part I can do quietly, through a lawyer in another state I've used for 30 years. A man who has never once in 3 decades let anything leak. He can set up the structures, the trusts, the guardianship protections, all of it without a single document crossing a desk that Charles has eyes on. That part is nearly done already. By the end of next week, legally speaking, Maya will be protected. If anything happens to me, if anything happens to you, there are provisions. She can't be taken. She can't be used. The money can't be turned into a leash. I've built it so that the only person who controls her future is her and you until she's grown. Caleb let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. And the second thing is Charles. Her voice changed when she said the name went cooler and harder. And that one I can't do quietly, not forever, because at some point I have to confront what he did, and the moment I confront him, he knows the game has changed. So the order matters. The walls go up first. Maya is safe first, and only then, only when there is nothing he can do to her, do I go to my brother and put 12 years on the table in front of him. "How are you going to prove it?" Caleb asked. That he knew Naomi's journal is her word, and it's Victoria. It's the word of a woman who ran away and changed her name. A man like Charles with the lawyers, a man like Charles he'll say she was paranoid. He'll say she imagined the man in the diner. He'll say a delivery driver and a runaway cooked up a story to get at the trust. You know he will. So how do you prove it? There was a silence on the line, and when Victoria spoke again, there was something almost like grim admiration in her voice. "You'd have made a good lawyer, Caleb. That's exactly the problem, and it's exactly what I've spent 4 days solving. The journal isn't proof, you're right, but the journal told me where to look." She said a man came to the diner and left a $100 bill on an empty table. She said he worked for Charles. She said she knew the look. So I started from the other end. I don't need to prove the man was there. I need to prove Charles paid someone to find her, and men like Charles don't pay for that kind of work out of their own pocket. They run it through the company, through accounts, through invoices that get buried under 100 other invoices because nobody's ever going to look. And you can look. "I own half of it," Victoria said simply. "I've had access to those records for 30 years, and I've never once had a reason to go digging through investigator retainers from a decade ago. Until now." A pause. "It's going to take time. These things were buried on purpose by people who are very good at burying things. But money always leaves a trail, Caleb. That was the first thing my father taught me. He said, Victoria, you can hide almost anything in this world, but you cannot hide where the money went, because the money always has to come from somewhere and go to somewhere, and if you follow it long enough, it will tell you every secret a man has. He taught me that, so I could protect the family." Her voice went hard as flint. "I don't think he imagined I'd use it to take the family apart." Over the next 2 weeks, Caleb watched from a distance over phone calls late at night, as Victoria Ashford turned the full weight of 30 years of power toward a single point. She was careful. She was patient in a way that impressed and slightly frightened him. And in the middle of it, she did something else. Something that had nothing to do with Charles, or trusts, or investigators. Something that mattered more to Caleb than all of it put together. She asked to meet Maya. "On your terms," she said quickly before Caleb could even react. "Not as an Ashford, not as an aunt with a fortune, not as anything Maya needs to understand yet, just Caleb. I don't want the first time I meet my sister's child to be wrapped up in lawyers and secrets and Charles. I want to meet her the way Naomi would have wanted. As a person. Let me be nobody. Let me be a friend of yours. I'll come to you, not the mansion. God, not the mansion that's the last place. Somewhere ordinary. A park. Anywhere. I've spent 12 years grieving a sister and 3 weeks learning I have a niece, and I would like to see her face before I go to war for it. Is that all right to ask?" And Caleb, who had been braced for weeks for this woman to try to buy his daughter to overwhelm her with the mansion and the money and the sheer force of Ashford gravity, heard her ask instead, to be nobody to meet a 6-year-old at a park, with no name and no fortune attached, and felt the last of his suspicion quietly die. "There's a playground," he said, "near our place. Saturday mornings I take her. She likes the swings. You could just be there. I'll say you're a friend from work. See how it goes." "Thank you," Victoria said, and her voice cracked on it. "Thank you, Caleb." Saturday morning came gray and cool. Caleb took Maya to the playground the way he did every week, and he was more nervous than he'd been in years, and he tried not to show it, and Maya, of course, noticed anyway, because children notice everything. "Daddy, why are you doing the thing with your face?" "What thing?" "The worried thing. You do it with your eyebrows." She demonstrated scrunching her small face into an exaggerated frown, and despite everything, Caleb laughed. "That's just my face, baby. Go swing, I'll push you." He was pushing her on the swings when Victoria arrived. He saw her from across the playground and almost didn't recognize her because she'd done something he wouldn't have thought possible. She'd made herself ordinary. No jewelry. Plain clothes, the kind a normal person owned. She'd come alone, no driver, no assistant, and she stood at the edge of the playground for a moment, just looking, and Caleb understood she was looking at Maya, and he understood what it cost her, because he'd seen that look before. It was the look of a person seeing a ghost's face on a living child. She walked over slowly. "Caleb, good to see you." Her voice was steady. She was working hard to keep it steady. "Vicky, hey. Maya, baby, this is my friend from work. Her name's Vicky." Maya, mid-swing, twisted around to look at her, and the two of them, the 6-year-old and the billionaire, looked at each other for the first time, and Caleb held his breath. "Hi," Maya said. "You want to know a secret?" Victoria's composure trembled. "I would love to know a secret. If you pour the milk before the cereal floats, and floating cereal is bad luck. My mommy told me." Maya said it with the total authority of a person conveying essential information. "So you gotta do the cereal first." Victoria Ashford stood very still. Caleb watched her face do a dozen things at once. Watched her hear her dead sister's voice come out of the mouth of a child on a swing. Watched her fight, and mostly win the urge to fall apart in a public park in front of a little girl who had no idea who she was. "Your mommy," Victoria said carefully. "Sounds like she was very wise." "She was the wisest," Maya said matter of fact, and turned back around. "Push me higher, Daddy." Caleb pushed her higher. And Victoria stood beside him, and after a moment, he heard her let out a long, shaking breath, and when he glanced over, she was wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. That same ordinary human gesture he'd seen in her marble hall 3 weeks ago, and she was smiling through it. smiling like something in her chest had finally, after 12 years, unlocked. "She's got her," Victoria whispered. "Caleb. She's got Isabella all through her. The way she holds her chin. That certainty. Isabella used to say things exactly like that, like they were just obvious facts of the universe. Floating cereal is bad luck. My God, she's alive in her. Some part of my sister is right there on that swing being alive." "I know," Caleb said quietly. "I see it every day. It's the best and the hardest thing about her." They stayed at the playground an hour. Victoria didn't try to do too much. She didn't overwhelm Maya. She pushed her on the swing when Caleb's arms got tired. She listened with total attention to a very long and structurally incoherent story about a friend at school named Priya and a disagreement over a purple crayon. She learned that Maya's favorite animal was a fox because of the blanket, and that Maya intended to have a real fox someday, and that Caleb had explained you cannot have a real fox, and that Maya considered this an open question rather than a settled one. And when it was time to go, Maya, with the sudden and complete affection children hand out for no reason at all, walked up to Victoria and hugged her around the legs and said, "Bye, Vicky," and ran off toward the car. Victoria stood there with her hand pressed to her mouth. "I have to go," she said unsteadily. "I have to go before I can't fall apart in front of her. Caleb, thank you. You have no idea what you've thank you." "Come again next Saturday," Caleb said, and he was surprised to find he meant it completely. "Same time. She liked you. She doesn't hug just anybody." Victoria nodded, unable to speak, and walked to her car, and Caleb watched her get in and sit for a moment with both hands on the wheel before she drove away, and he recognized it because it was exactly what he'd done in the delivery van outside her mansion 3 weeks before. The stillness of a person whose whole understanding of their life has just shifted under them. She came back the next Saturday, and the one after. And somewhere in those gray mornings at the playground, without any documents or declarations, an aunt and a niece became real to each other. Maya never knew there was anything to it. She just knew that Vicky came on Saturdays, and Vicky always listened to her whole story, no matter how long it was. And Vicky had started bringing books. Good ones, the kind Caleb couldn't always afford, and reading them to her on the bench while Caleb caught his breath. Maya, 6 years old, had no idea she was being handed back a piece of her mother's family. She just knew she had a new friend who was old and kind, and cried a little sometimes for reasons Maya didn't ask about, because in Maya's experience, grown-ups cried, and it wasn't always your business why. But underneath the Saturdays, the other thing was still moving. Victoria called on a Tuesday night 3 weeks into the playground mornings, and Caleb knew from the first word that something had changed. "I found it," she said. He set down the dish he was drying. "Found what?" "The trail. The money." Her voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a person holding something enormous very carefully. "It took my lawyer's forensic people 2 weeks to untangle it because it was buried exactly the way I said it would be, routed through a consulting firm that doesn't really exist, billed as strategic advisory services, the kind of line item nobody ever questions. But it's there, Caleb. Payments. Regular payments over years from an account Charles controls to a private investigation firm. And the firm I had them looked into. They specialize in one thing: finding people who don't want to be found, locating missing persons." Quietly, Caleb's grip tightened on the counter. So he did hire someone. He hired someone the year after Isabella disappeared. And here's the part that here's the part I can barely say out loud. Her voice wavered for the first time. The payments didn't stop when they found her. That's what I couldn't understand at first. If he'd hired them to find her and they'd failed, the payments would have tapered off. If he'd hired them and they'd found her and he'd brought her home, the payments would have stopped. But they didn't stop and they didn't taper. They continued, steady, for years, right up until... She had to pause. Right up until about 3 years ago. Right up until she died. The kitchen went silent. "He was watching her," Caleb said. The words came out flat and cold. "He didn't just find her and hide it. He kept a man on her, for years, watching my wife, watching us. He was making sure she stayed lost. Victoria said, and her voice had gone terrible. Think about it. A lost Isabella can't come home. A lost Isabella can't have children who'd have a claim. A lost Isabella means the trust flows to Charles. So he didn't need her back, he needed her gone. And the safest kind of gone is a woman who's alive and hiding and doesn't know she's being watched, because a dead body raises questions and a returned heiress ruins everything. But a runaway who stays a runaway is perfect. He paid a man for years just to make sure she never came home and never got found by anyone but him. And the payment stopped when she died because... Victoria's voice broke completely. Because he didn't need to watch her anymore. Because the problem solved itself. My sister got cancer and died at 34, and it solved his problem for him, and he stopped paying the man. And that's how I know the exact month my sister died, just from looking at when my brother stopped spending money to keep her lost. Me bustai. Caleb had to sit down. He pulled out a kitchen chair and sat in it heavily. The phone pressed to his ear, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all because there wasn't anything to say to a thing that ugly. There's one more thing, Victoria said, finally quiet now drained. And it's the thing that changes everything. And it's the thing I have to be sure you understand before I do what I'm about to do. The investigators' reports. My lawyer got them. The firm keeps records they have to for liability. And the reports don't just say Isabella was located. The later ones, Caleb, the later ones mention a husband and a child. The blood drained out of Caleb's face. He knows about Maya. He's known about Maya, Victoria said, for years. Since she was born from the dates. Charles has known this entire time that Isabella had a daughter. Which means everything I've been racing to protect her from, he's already known the whole time. He's known there was a child with a claim, and he sat on it same as he sat on Isabella, because as long as nobody else knew, the child was no threat. A secret heir isn't an heir. She's only a threat the moment someone with standing knows she exists and can act on it. Victoria's voice hardened into something Caleb had never heard from her, something that made the hair stand up on his arms. And now someone with standing knows. Me. I know. And the second Charles realizes I know about Isabella, about the watching, about Maya, about all of it, the calculation changes for him. Because I'm not a scared runaway, he can watch from a distance. I'm his equal. I own half of everything he owns, and I am about to become the single greatest threat to that fortune he has ever faced in his life. Caleb closed his eyes. You're about to make yourself the target. I'm about to make myself the target, Victoria agreed, so that Maya doesn't have to be one. That's the whole point, Caleb. That's what the walls were for. They're done now. She's protected fully as of yesterday, which means I'm finally free to do this. As long as Maya was exposed, I couldn't move against Charles because a cornered Charles might do something desperate about the child. But now the child is untouchable. Legally locked away where he can't reach her, can't use her, can't touch a dollar that's meant for her. So now I can walk into my brother's office and put 12 years on his desk and dare him to explain himself, and the worst he can do is come after me. And I've been ready for Charles to come after me my whole life. I was raised for it. He just never had a reason to try before. Victoria. Caleb's voice was rough. You don't have to do this. Maya's safe now, you said so yourself. We could leave it. Let it lie. Take the win. You've got your niece. I've got the truth about my wife. Maya's protected. We could just walk away from Charles and let him rot with what he did. No, Victoria said, and there was no give in it at all. No, we couldn't. And I'll tell you why, and then I'll never bring it up again if you disagree, because you've earned the right to want this over. But listen to me first. She drew a breath. My brother paid a man to keep my sister lost. For years. He let me grieve. He let our father die not knowing. He watched Isabella wash dishes until her hands bled and marry a good man and raise a beautiful daughter and get sick and die, and at no point in any of it did he lift a finger except to keep paying a man to make sure she never came home to the sister who loved her. He didn't just fail her, Caleb. He hunted her. quietly, patiently for money. And then she died, and he counted it as a win. Her voice shook with a fury that had been 12 years building. Naomi wrote in that journal that she wanted to hand her daughter the truth and every choice in the world because her father handed her a life with no choice in it. Well, I am Isabella's sister, and I am not going to hand my brother a single choice in this either. He made his choices in the dark, where no one could see for 12 years. He is going to answer for them in the light. I owe her that. It's the last thing I can do for her, and I'm going to do it, and God help Charles Ashford when I walk through his door. Caleb sat in his small kitchen holding the phone and thought about his wife standing in a diner 2 years before she died, looking a man dead in the eye and saying, "You've got the wrong girl, sir," and walking away without dropping a single plate. He thought about the courage that took. The sheer, quiet, unbreakable courage of a woman who'd been hunted and refused to let it show, who'd protected her family by pretending right up until the end that she was exactly as ordinary as she'd fought so hard to become. And he understood that the same blood ran in the woman on the other end of the phone. Different in 100 ways, one had run from the money, and one had stayed and mastered it, but underneath the same spine, the same refusal to be managed. "Okay," he said quietly. "Then do it. But Victoria, you're not doing it alone. Whatever happens when you walk through that door, whatever he throws at you, you've got somebody now. You've got me, and you've got that little girl who hugs you at the playground, and neither of us is going anywhere. You spent 12 years grieving your sister by yourself in that big empty house. You don't grieve alone anymore, and you don't fight alone anymore either. That's what family's supposed to be. That's the part your father never understood, and Naomi knew in her bones. So go do what you have to do. And then come to the playground on Saturday because Maya's already asking where you were last week, and I'm running out of ways to explain why Vicky from work keeps disappearing." There was a long silence on the line, and then Victoria Ashford, the richest and most powerful woman in the state, the woman who had grieved alone in a marble mansion for 12 years, made a small broken sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. "I'll be there Saturday," she said. "Tell her Vicky had to take care of something important. Tell her I'm taking care of some family business." A pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was steady and clear and ready. "Because that's exactly what it is. It's about time somebody in this family took care of it right." She walked into her brother's office on a Thursday morning without an appointment, and the assistant who tried to stop her took one look at Victoria Ashford's face and thought better of it. Charles was behind his desk on the phone, and when he saw her, he said something smooth into the receiver and hung up, and gave her the smile he'd been giving her their whole lives, the smile that never once reached his eyes. "Vicky, to what do I owe the—" "Sit down, Charles." "I am sitting." "Then stay sitting." She set a folder on his desk. She didn't slide it across. She set it down and let it sit there between them, and she watched his eyes go to it and come back up, and she saw the first flicker of something behind the smile. "What's this?" "That's 12 years, Charles. That's what that is." Victoria's voice was perfectly level, and that was the frightening thing about it. She'd learned long ago that the people who scared you most were never the ones who shouted. That's a consulting firm that doesn't exist, billed as strategic advisory, running out of an account you control, paying a private investigation firm that specializes in finding people who don't want to be found. Payments that started the year after Isabella disappeared. Payments that didn't stop when they found her. Payments that continued month after month, year after year, right up until she died. She leaned forward, both hands flat on his desk. "You found her, Charles. You found our sister within a year, and you didn't tell me, and you didn't bring her home, and you didn't stop. You kept a man on her, for a decade. You watched her wash dishes and get married and have a child and get sick and die, and you paid for the privilege. And the only reason you stopped paying is that cancer finished the job you were too much of a coward to do yourself." The smile was gone now. Charles's face had gone very still, the still of a man rapidly recalculating. "You've been in the accounts," he said. "I own the accounts. You've misunderstood what you found. Then explain it to me." She straightened up. "Go ahead, Charles. I'm a reasonable woman. Explain to me why you were paying a firm that finds missing people for 12 years and never once mentioned to your grieving sister that our missing sister had been found. Explain the reports. I have the reports, Charles. The firm keeps them. It turns out for liability. Explain the ones that mention a husband and a child. Explain why you've known for years that Isabella had a daughter and said nothing. Her voice never rose, and it never needed to. Take your time. I've waited 12 years. I can wait a few more minutes for the lie you're building right now behind your eyes. And Charles, to his credit, or his damnation, didn't try the lie. He'd always been the smartest kind of coward, the kind who knows exactly when a position can't be held. He sat back in his chair, and he looked at his sister for a long moment, and then he did the worst thing he could have done, the thing that told Victoria everything about what he'd become. He shrugged. She left, he said. Nobody made her leave Vicky. She chose it. She humiliated this family. She blew up the Prescott arrangement she cost us. Do you have any idea what her little disappearing act cost us in the deal alone, never mind the reputation? And then she pops up washing dishes in some diner married to a nobody playing house in a slum. What was I supposed to do, drag her back? Put her on the cover of a magazine? Ashford heiress found slinging hash. He spread his hands. I contained it. That's what I did. I made sure it stayed quiet. I protected this family from her the same way I've been protecting it from her since the day she was born. You want to be angry at me for that? Fine. But don't pretend I did something you wouldn't have. The trust. Victoria cut him off. Say the real reason, Charles, or I'll say it for you. You didn't keep her lost to protect the family's reputation. You kept her lost because a found Isabella with a husband and a child is an heir with a bloodline, and a lost Isabella is nothing. You did the math the same way our father would have. A returned sister costs you the trust. A dead or vanished sister hands it to you. So you made sure she stayed vanished. You spent 12 years, and God knows how much money to keep our own flesh and blood exiled and alone, and unclaimed, because her staying lost was worth a fortune to you. Say it. Say the number was worth more to you than she was. For the first time in the conversation, something cracked in Charles's face. Not remorse, Victoria would think later, never quite remorse, but the discomfort of a man forced to look directly at the shape of himself. You don't understand how any of this works. You never did. You had the luxury of being the good one, because I did the ugly things that kept the good one comfortable. Every family like ours needs a Charles Vicky. You just never wanted to know his name. I know his name now. Victoria picked the folder back up off his desk. She'd only ever brought a copy, and she wanted him to understand that, wanted him to sit with the fact that the originals were somewhere he'd never reach. And here is what's going to happen, Charles, and you're going to listen, because I've spent 30 years letting you do the ugly things, and I am done. Isabella's daughter is protected. Fully. Legally. As of 2 weeks ago, there is nothing you can do to her, nothing you can take from her, no way you can touch her or the provisions that are hers by right. I built that first before I ever came to see you because I know exactly what you are, and I wasn't going to give you a target. So whatever you're calculating right now, stop. There's no move. The child is a fortress, and you're on the wrong side of the walls. Vicky, I'm not finished. She had never in her life spoken to him like this, and she watched it land. Watched her brother realize that the sister he'd counted on to always ultimately keep the peace was not going to keep it this time. You're going to resign your position. Health reasons, family reasons, whatever story you like. I don't care what you tell the board, but you're going to be gone from the operating side of this company within 90 days. You'll keep your name and you'll keep your dignity in public, because I have no interest in dragging the family through the mud. Isabella died to escape, but you will never again make a single decision that touches this family's future. And the trust that you did all of this for, is going to go exactly where it was always meant to go. To the direct descendants of our father's 3 children. Which, since you have none and I have none, means it goes to Isabella's line. It goes to her daughter. Every dollar you tried to keep by keeping our sister lost is going to that little girl. And you are going to sign the papers acknowledging her claim, and you are going to do it this week, or the copy of that folder that isn't in my hand right now goes to people who will be far less gentle with you than I'm being." "Me?" Charles stared at her. "You'd ruin your own brother." "No, Charles." And here, for just a moment, the level voice wavered, and 12 years of grief showed through it. "You ruined yourself. 12 years ago, when a man came back to you and said, 'I found her, she's alive. She's washing dishes in a diner an hour from here.' And you had a choice. You could have told me. You could have told our father. You could have driven out there yourself and stood in that diner and told your baby sister that whatever she was running from, she still had a family that loved her. And instead, you did the math. That was the moment, Charles. That's the moment you ruined yourself. I'm just the one who finally found out." She turned to go, and at the door she stopped, and she said one last thing without turning around, because she couldn't look at him and say it. "She forgave everyone you know. In the end, she wrote it down. She forgave our father, and she forgave me for the ways I failed her, and she forgave this whole cage of a family. Everyone." A pause. "She never mentioned you, Charles. Not once in years of writing. I read every page. You weren't even worth the ink it would have taken to forgive you. I thought you should know that. I thought that should be the thing you carry." And she walked out, and she did not cry until she was in the car, and then she cried for a long time. And they were not only sad tears, because somewhere in them was the clean, exhausted relief of a person who has finally, after 12 years, done the thing they were put on earth to do. Charles signed the papers within the week. He resigned within the month. He never fought it, and Victoria understood why a man who had spent his life in the dark could not survive the light, and he knew it, and some small surviving human part of him may even have been relieved to stop. He moved to a house in another state, and the family saw him rarely, and Maya never met him at all, and that Victoria decided was exactly as it should be. Some doors you close, and you let stay closed. Naomi had understood that. It had taken Victoria 12 years and a folder full of buried money to learn it. The Saturdays continued. They had never stopped. All through the confrontation with Charles. Victoria had kept her word, had come to the playground the very Saturday after she walked out of her brother's office, and Maya had run to her and hugged her and demanded to know where she'd been, and Victoria had knelt down and said, "I had to take care of some family business, sweetheart." And Maya had accepted this, the way she accepted most things completely and without follow-up, and dragged Victoria off to see a caterpillar. But something changed after Charles. The secret that had sat under everything, the fear that had made every Saturday feel a little like borrowed time that was gone now. Maya was safe. Not just protected on paper, but safe in the deeper way, safe from the man who might have turned her into a piece on a board. And so slowly, carefully over months, Caleb and Victoria began to let the last walls down. It was Caleb who decided when Maya was ready to know. Not Victoria. She deferred to him on everything that touched the child, always without exception, and that deference was itself a kind of proof. And Caleb noticed it, and it was one of the 1,000 small things that turned his caution into trust, and his trust into something like family. But it was Caleb who chose the moment because he was her father, and because Naomi had left the choosing to him. He chose a Sunday afternoon. He sat his daughter down. She was 7. By then the gap in her teeth filled in with a new one, and he told her the truth. Not all of it. Not the ugly parts, not Charles. Not the man in the diner, not the years of being watched. Those were for later. For when she was grown the way Naomi had wanted the truth handed over in full when she was old enough to hold it. But the shape of it. That her mommy had come from a family with a big house and a lot of money. That her mommy hadn't been happy there and had left it to find a different kind of life and had found daddy and had been happier poor and free than she'd ever been rich. That kind Vicky from the playground who read her the good books was not a friend from work at all. That Vicky was her aunt. Her mommy's big sister, her family. Maya was quiet for a while, working through it with the total seriousness children bring to important information. "So Vicky is Mommy's sister," she said finally. "That's right. And Mommy's sister is my aunt." "That's right, baby." Maya considered this. Did Vicky know Mommy? When Mommy was little, she did. She knew her better than anybody for a long time. She's the one who named your mommy. She taught her to read. She taught her to ride a bike. Caleb's throat tightened. She's got a whole lot of stories about your mommy, Maya. Stories from before I ever knew her. Stories nobody else in the world knows. Would you want to hear those someday? And Maya's face, Naomi's face, that certain chin-up floating cereal is bad luck face lit up like a window at sunrise. Vicky knows stories about Mommy. So many stories. From when Mommy was little. From when your mommy was smaller than you. Maya was up off the couch and headed for the door before Caleb could stop her, and he caught her by the back of her shirt, laughing, and she was practically vibrating, and she said, "Can we call her? Can we call Vicky right now? I want to hear a story. I want to hear one right now. Daddy, please." And Caleb, who 3 years earlier had buried a woman he thought was an orphan with no past, and who had spent those years unable to answer his daughter's simplest questions about where she came from, picked up the phone and called Victoria Ashford, and when she answered, he handed the phone to a 7-year-old girl, who said without preamble, breathless with joy, "Vicky, Daddy says you know stories about my mommy from when she was little, is that true?" Caleb couldn't hear Victoria's side, but he watched his daughter's face, and he saw it happen, saw the moment a child who had grown up believing she came from nowhere, discovered that she came from somewhere, that there was a whole person on the other end of the line who had held her mother as a baby and could pour her mother's childhood into her story by story for the rest of both their lives. And Maya sat down right there on the floor with the phone pressed to her ear and said, "Tell me a story about Mommy," and then went completely reverently silent, listening, her whole small body still, and after a moment, her face broke into a smile so wide and so bright that Caleb had to look away, because it was Naomi's smile exactly, and it was aimed at a story about Naomi, and the circle of it was almost more than a grieving man could stand. They became a family. Not all at once, and not in the way anyone would have predicted the day a delivery driver dropped a package on a billionaire's floor. Victoria never tried to buy her way in, never tried to move them to the mansion, never tried to turn Maya into an Ashford. She learned to come to them. She learned the small, ordinary life Naomi had chosen, and she came into it gently on its own terms. A woman who owned half a city, learning to sit at a scratched kitchen table and eat rice and beans and be happy there, the way her sister had been happy there. Understanding at last what Isabella had understood at 21, that the counting was the disease, and that the cure was a table with people you loved at it, and nothing more complicated than that. Caleb kept his job at first out of pride, and then let Victoria talk him into going back and finishing what he'd started years before the engineering he'd walked away from when Naomi got sick and the bills came in. She didn't pay for it as charity. She was too smart for that, and she knew him too well by now. She called it what it was, an investment in the man her sister had chosen, made by the only family her sister had left. Caleb let her eventually because he'd finally learned what she'd learned, that letting the people who love you help you is not the same as being bought, and that pride held too tight is just another kind of cage. And the money, the trust, the fortune Charles had spent 12 years and a sister's whole life trying to keep went where Naomi's journal had said it should go into structures built not to trap Maya, but to free her, to give her every choice in the world, the way her mother had promised. It sat there protected, waiting for a little girl to grow up and decide for herself what she wanted from it, if anything exactly as Naomi had wished. Handed the truth and every choice. The difference Naomi had written between what her father did and what she would do. And now it was real, built in law and steel, guarded by an aunt who had learned the lesson at terrible cost. Maya would never be counted. She would only ever be loved and told the truth and left free. There was one more thing, and it happened on a gray Tuesday, about a year after Caleb first walked up those marble steps. He took Maya to the cemetery on the east side of the city, the way he did a few times a year, to the headstone that read, "Naomi Johnson, beloved wife and mother." And when they got there, Victoria was already waiting. She'd asked to come. She'd never seen the grave. And Caleb had said yes, and so the three of them stood there together in the cold, a father, a daughter, and an aunt, around the grave of the woman who connected all of them. The woman who'd been two people and was buried under the name of the one she'd chosen. Maya put down the flowers. She'd insisted on purple ones because Caleb had told her about the purple bicycle, and she'd decided her mommy must have liked purple, and nobody had the heart to tell her it wasn't necessarily so. She talked to the headstone the way children talk to graves, unself-consciously telling her mother about school and about Priya, and the crayon situation which had been resolved, and about Vicky's stories, and about a story in particular that she'd loved about the time Mommy had climbed a tree and gotten stuck, and Vicky had had to climb up after her. And Victoria stood there listening to a 7-year-old tell a dead woman a story that Victoria herself had given her, a story about the two sisters as girls, passed from Victoria to Maya to Naomi's grave, and back around again, and she began quietly to cry. "I'm sorry," she said to Caleb, wiping her face. "I promised myself I wouldn't." "You don't have to be sorry. Not here, not for her." Victoria looked down at the headstone. And then she did something Caleb hadn't expected. She knelt down right there on the cold ground in her expensive coat, and she put her hand flat on the top of the stone, the way you'd put your hand on a sleeping person's back, and she spoke to her sister for the first time in 12 years. "I found you," she said quietly. "It took me too long, Bella. It took me 12 years, and I'm so sorry it took me 12 years. But I found you. And I found her." She looked up at Maya, who had gone quiet and was watching with a child's grave attention. "And I'm going to take care of her. Not the way they'd have taken care of her. The way you would have. Free. Told the truth. Loved for herself. I promise you. I've built the whole thing to make sure of it. She's going to have every choice you never got. I swear it to you on everything I have left, which turns out not to be the money at all. It turns out the only thing I have left that's worth anything is her. You knew that. You knew it at 21. It took me my whole life and losing you to learn it." Her hand pressed against the cold stone. "Thank you for forgiving me. I didn't deserve it. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to." Maya walked over and knelt down next to her aunt, and without saying anything, she put her small hand on top of Victoria's hand on top of the headstone, and the two of them stayed like that. The old woman and the child connected to each other and to the woman beneath the stone, and Caleb stood behind them with his hands in his pockets and his eyes full and let it be exactly what it was. On the drive home, Maya fell asleep in the back seat, worn out the way children get after big feelings. Victoria rode in the front next to Caleb, and for a long time, neither of them spoke, and it was the comfortable silence, now the silence of two people who no longer needed to fill the space between them with anything. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Caleb said finally quietly, so as not to wake Maya. "That first day. When I dropped that package on your floor and I looked up and saw her face on your wall. I thought my whole world was ending. I thought I was about to find out something that would ruin every good memory I had of my wife. I drove up that hill with a package, and I thought I knew exactly who Naomi was, and I thought finding out different would take her away from me all over again. And instead it gave her back to me." Caleb's voice was rough. "All of her. The parts she couldn't show me. I spent 8 years loving half a woman and thinking it was the whole thing. And it turns out the half she hid was the bravest half. She looked at everything you people had, all the money, all the power, all of it, and she said no. She walked away from a kingdom to eat cheap noodles at a bus stop with a man who had nothing. I used to think I was the lucky one, that I'd married up somehow, that a woman like that settling for a man like me was the luckiest break of my life." He shook his head slowly. "I had it exactly backwards. She didn't settle. She chose. She had the whole world in her hand, and she chose me. She chose Maya. She chose the small life, the free life, the true one. That's not settling. That's the bravest thing I ever heard of. And I got to be the man she chose it for. Me. A delivery driver with a borrowed suit." His voice broke, and he let it. "How do you ever deserve a thing like that?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. "You don't," she said gently. "That's what I've finally understood, Caleb. You don't deserve it. That's the whole point of it. My father spent his life trying to build a family out of things people deserved, trust you earned marriages, you qualified for love, you had to be worthy of. And it made a family that hunted its own child through the dark for money. And then my sister walked away from all of it and built the real thing out of exactly the opposite. Out of a man who gave a stranger half his noodles without noticing he'd done it. Out of things nobody earned, and nobody deserved, and nobody counted. That's what love actually is. It's the thing you can't earn, and can't buy, and can't deserve. She figured that out at 21, and it took the rest of us decades and a grave to catch up. She looked out the window at the gray afternoon going by. You didn't deserve her, Caleb, and she didn't deserve you. And that's exactly why it was real. That's the only reason any of it was ever real. They drove the rest of the way in silence. The sleeping child in the back seat, and when they pulled up outside the small apartment where Naomi had chosen to spend her one wild and hidden life, Victoria helped carry Maya inside, and she stayed for dinner, and she sat at the scratched kitchen table and ate what was put in front of her, and laughed at Maya's jokes, and listened to her stories, and she was for that evening, and for every evening, after exactly what her sister had wanted her to be. Not a billionaire. Not an Ashford. Just family. Just Vicky, who came for dinner and knew the stories and stayed, and so it was that a struggling black single father who once believed a portrait on a rich woman's wall would destroy everything he knew about his wife. Discovered instead that it gave her back to him whole. That the greatest secret Naomi ever kept was not about wealth or a name or a family she'd fled, but about love. About a woman who held the entire glittering world in her hand and set it down without hesitation and without regret to pick up a poor man's cheap umbrella in the rain. The Ashford fortune had bought mansions and companies, and the loyalty of men who would hunt a woman through the dark for a decade. It had never once in 3 generations bought a single thing that mattered. And in the end, the richest family in the state learned the only lesson worth learning from the poorest woman who ever ran from them, that the most valuable thing a person can ever possess is not counted in money, and cannot be inherited, and cannot be stolen, and cannot be deserved. It can only be chosen freely, the way Naomi chose it, the way Caleb was chosen, the way a little girl with her mother's smile would grow up knowing she had been every single day of her life. Love was never the thing they almost lost in that mansion. Love was the thing that walked out of it and built something better, and left the door open behind her for anyone brave enough to follow. And they followed. They all followed her home.